Eliza Matthews stared at the towering stranger blocking her doorway, his weathered face unreadable as he uttered the words that would shatter her carefully ordered world. You need shelter, and I need a wife. No courtship, no pretty promises, just survival for us both. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The stagecoach rattled to a halt outside the wooden ranch house, dust billowing around the wheels as the driver called to his team. Eliza Matthews clutched her small valise tighter, her knuckles white with apprehension. Through the window, she could see the sprawling ranch that was to be her new home, the weathered log cabin sitting proudly against a backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. The setting sun cast everything in a golden glow, but dark clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening an evening storm. Cutter Ranch, ma'am, the driver announced, already climbing down to retrieve her trunks. End of the line. Eliza took a steadying breath. After 3 days of bone-jarring travel from Kansas City, she had finally reached her destination. The correspondence with Mr. Jackson Cutter had been brief but promising. A successful rancher seeking a wife, offering security and respectability in exchange for companionship and help running his household. At 26, with no family and dwindling prospects in the city, it had seemed like her best option. But now, faced with the reality of her decision, doubt crept in like the chill evening air. What did she really know about this man? What if the letters, polite and straightforward as they were, had concealed a cruel nature? What if... The stagecoach door swung open, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. Need a hand, miss? The driver asked, offering his weathered palm. Eliza accepted his help, stepping down carefully onto Wyoming Territory soil. Her legs, stiff from the journey, protested the movement. She straightened her travel-worn dress as best she could and adjusted her bonnet, wishing suddenly that she looked more presentable for this first meeting. The driver was already unloading her trunks, her entire life packed into 2 wooden boxes. The small ranch house stood silent, no sign of movement from within. For one terrible moment, Eliza feared there had been a mistake. Perhaps Mr. Cutter had changed his mind, or perhaps he'd never meant to meet her at all. Then the front door opened. The man who emerged was not what she had expected. Jackson Cutter filled the doorframe, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in silence. He wore a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. His face, partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard, bore the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the open sky. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep blue and watchful, taking her measure as she took his. He stepped onto the porch and paused there, one hand resting on a support post. Neither of them spoke immediately, the weight of their arrangement hanging in the air between them. The stagecoach driver cleared his throat. That'll be all, Mr. Cutter. Ladies' belongings are unloaded. Jackson nodded and reached into his pocket, producing payment for the driver. The transaction complete, the driver tipped his hat to Eliza. Good luck to you, ma'am, he said, with a knowing look that made her cheeks warm. As the stagecoach pulled away, Eliza felt suddenly abandoned. There was no going back now. Miss Matthews, Jackson Cutter finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. You made it. Yes, she replied, finding her own voice. The journey was long but uneventful. He nodded, then gestured to her trunks. I'll bring these in. You must be tired. The practicality of his response was almost a relief. No flowery welcomes or false sentiments, just an acknowledgement of her need for rest. She watched as he lifted both trunks easily, carrying them up the porch steps and into the house. She followed, her legs still unsteady from the journey. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that spoke of an educated mind. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted, many bearing the mark of skilled hands. "Your room is through there," Jackson said, indicating a door off the main living area. "I've had it prepared. There's fresh water for washing." Eliza nodded, gratitude mingling with her apprehension. "Thank you, Mr. Cutter." "Jackson," he corrected, setting her trunks down inside the bedroom doorway. "Seems right, considering we're to be married," she finished silently. The thought sent a flutter of panic through her chest. He must have read something in her expression, for his next words addressed her unspoken fear. "Miss Matthews, I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I want you to know that I intend to honor our agreement in all respects. You'll have your own room for as long as you wish it. No expectations beyond what was stated in our letters." The knot of tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "I appreciate that, Jackson." His name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate in a way that emphasized their unusual situation. "You should rest," he said, already moving toward the door. "We can talk more at supper." Alone in the small bedroom, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, letting the reality of her situation wash over her. The room was plain but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a hand-stitched quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out over the rolling prairie, now painted in the fiery colors of sunset. This was to be her home now. This remote ranch, this sturdy cabin, this taciturn man with careful words and watchful eyes. She washed her face and hands in the cool water Jackson had provided, changed into a cleaner dress, and attempted to tame her travel-worn appearance. By the time she emerged, twilight had deepened outside the windows, and Jackson had lit lamps around the main room, giving it a warm, golden glow. He stood at a wood stove in the kitchen area, his back to her, as he tended to something that filled the cabin with savory smells. The domesticity of the scene struck her. This solitary man preparing a meal, maintaining a home on his own. "Can I help?" she offered, stepping closer. He turned, seeming almost startled by her presence, as though he'd forgotten for a moment that his life had changed. "It's nearly ready," he said, but gestured to a cupboard. "Plates are there if you want to set the table." They worked in silence, moving around each other carefully, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. When they finally sat down to a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Eliza found herself studying her future husband across the table. His hands, large and calloused, handled his utensils with surprising grace. His posture was straight but not rigid, conveying a natural dignity rather than stiffness. When he caught her watching, his expression softened slightly, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement. "You must have questions," he said, breaking their silence. "Several," she admitted, "though I'm not sure where to begin. Perhaps with why I sought a wife through correspondence rather than courting someone locally." She nodded, relieved that he had addressed the most obvious question. "Nearest town is 30 miles east," he explained. "Not much opportunity for meeting eligible women, and ranching doesn't leave much time for courtship." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I need a partner, Miss Matthews. Someone practical and intelligent who understands what building a life out here requires. And you determined I possessed these qualities from my letters? Your letters showed good sense and education. You asked the right questions about the ranch, the living conditions, what would be expected of you. You didn't romanticize frontier life." Eliza nodded, remembering how carefully she had composed those letters, trying to present herself honestly while still appearing a desirable prospect. "And what of you?" she asked. "Your letters were informative but revealed little of yourself." Jackson set down his spoon, his expression thoughtful. "I'm 34 years old. Built this ranch from almost nothing over the last 12 years. I work hard, read when I can, and believe in dealing fairly with others." He met her eyes directly. I'm not a complicated man, Miss Matthews, but I am a determined one. When I set my mind to something, I see it through. Outside, the first rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. The storm that had been threatening all evening was moving closer, a fitting backdrop to this moment of reckoning between two strangers contemplating a shared future. The marriage, Eliza said, finding courage to address what had been unspoken. When did you envision it taking place? There's a circuit preacher comes through every 2 weeks. He'll be here 3 days from now. Jackson paused, studying her reaction. Unless you need more time. More time for what, she wondered. To adjust to a decision already made? To learn the character of a man she had agreed to bind her life to? 3 days seems appropriate, she said finally. He nodded, accepting her answer without pushing for more. Another rumble of thunder, closer now, shook the windows slightly. Storm's coming in, he observed, rising to his feet. I need to check on the horses. Make yourself comfortable. This is your home now, too. As he reached for his coat by the door, Eliza found herself standing as well, moved by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Jackson, she called, and he turned, his hand on the door latch. Thank you. For the meal. And for being straightforward. Something that might have been a smile touched his lips briefly. Rest well, Miss Matthews. Tomorrow's soon enough to learn the rhythms of ranch life. Then he was gone, stepping out into the gathering darkness as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Eliza woke to unfamiliar sounds, a rooster's crow, distant lowing of cattle, and the soft crackle of a fire being stoked in another room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality rushed back. Cutter Ranch, Wyoming territory, the marriage arrangement. Sunlight streamed through the small window, painting golden rectangles on the rough wooden floor. She must have slept later than usual, accustomed as she was to rising at first light. The storm had continued well into the night, rain pounding against the roof as she lay awake, contemplating the turn her life had taken. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress, pinned her hair in a practical knot, and steeled herself for her first full day as the future Mrs. Cutter. When she emerged from her room, she found the main living area empty, though signs of Jackson's earlier presence remained. A coffee cup on the table, embers glowing in the fireplace, the scent of bacon lingering in the air. A folded piece of paper sat propped against a plate of food kept warm near the stove. Eliza picked it up, recognizing the same neat handwriting from his letters. Gone to check fences damaged in storm. Breakfast here. Make yourself at home. Back by midday. J.C. The note's brevity matched the man himself. No unnecessary words, just the essential information. Yet she found herself appreciating its thoughtfulness. He had prepared food for her, considered that she might wake hungry and uncertain in a strange place. After eating the simple but hearty breakfast, Eliza decided to use the morning to familiarize herself with what would soon be her domain. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, with the main living area and kitchen flowing together in an open space, her bedroom to one side, and what she presumed was Jackson's room on the opposite end. A door near the kitchen led to a modest pantry stocked with preserved foods, flour, sugar, and other staples. Everything was organized with practical efficiency, the mark of someone who valued order. Outside, the morning air was fresh and cool after the night's storm. The ranch spread before her, a barn and stables to the west, corrals beyond, and in the distance, pastures where cattle grazed against the backdrop of mountains. A kitchen garden, recently tended, grew near the house, and a chicken coop stood nearby, its occupants scratching contentedly in the dirt. It was beautiful in a rugged way, this place that was to be her home. The vastness of the landscape both exhilarated and intimidated her. In the city, buildings hemmed you in, people crowded around you. Here, the sky stretched endlessly, the horizon seeming impossibly far. Eliza spent the morning taking inventory of the household, noting what was well stocked and what might need attention. The practical task helped settle her nerves, giving her a sense of purpose. If she was to be mistress of this home, she would begin by understanding its workings. By midday, as promised, she heard the approach of a horse. Moving to the window, she watched as Jackson rode into the yard, his tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. He dismounted with fluid grace, speaking quietly to the horse as he led it toward the stables. Eliza busied herself preparing a simple midday meal from the provisions she'd found, bread, cheese, and some of the preserved fruit from the pantry. When Jackson entered, removing his hat and hanging it by the door, she had the table set and waiting. He paused, clearly surprised by this domestic scene awaiting him. "You didn't need to do that," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't displeased. "I wanted to make myself useful," she replied simply. He nodded, moving to wash his hands in a basin by the door before joining her at the table. His movements were deliberate, economical, like a man accustomed to considering each action before taking it. "Did you find everything you needed?" he asked as they began to eat. "Yes, you keep a well-organized home." "Necessity. Out here, disorder can be dangerous." They ate in silence for a few moments before Eliza gathered her courage to ask, "Would you tell me more about the ranch? If I'm to help manage it, I should understand its workings." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. 800 acres, most of it grazing land, 50 head of cattle, 6 horses, 2 milk cows. The stream that runs through the south pasture never runs dry even in the worst droughts. Good water, good grass. He paused, looking out the window at his domain. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land. "You've built all this yourself?" "Started with 100 acres and a broken-down cabin, worked for other ranchers, saved every penny, bought more land when I could." There was no boastfulness in his account, just a straightforward recounting of facts. "Last year was the first time I hired help. 2 cowhands who live in the bunkhouse behind the barn. Good men. Will I meet them? They're out with the herd today. They'll be back for Sunday dinner tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "I told them about our arrangement. Hope you don't mind." "No, of course not. Of course others would know the nature of her arrival. In a place this remote, a new woman appearing at a bachelor's ranch could only mean one thing." "What are their names?" "Tom Wells and Caleb Porter. Tom's older, been working cattle for 30 years. Caleb's younger, learning the trade. Both are respectful men." Eliza nodded, feeling both relief and nervousness at the prospect of meeting these first neighbors. "And the nearest town?" "Red Rock, 30 miles east, as I mentioned. Small place, general store, saloon, blacksmith, doctor who doubles as a dentist when needed. We make the trip once a month for supplies we can't produce ourselves." "And church?" she asked, wondering about the community they would be part of. "Same town, services every Sunday, though I don't always make it. The preacher understands that cattle don't observe the Sabbath." A faint smile touched his lips, softening his features. "As I said in my letter, Reverend Taylor circuits through the outlying ranches every 2 weeks. He'll be here Tuesday." Tuesday, her wedding day. The reminder sent a flutter through Eliza's stomach. "Tell me about yourself," Jackson said suddenly, catching her off guard. "Your letters told me the essential facts, but little else." Eliza smoothed her napkin, gathering her thoughts. "I was a teacher in Kansas City for 5 years. Before that, I lived with my aunt after my parents died of fever when I was 16. My aunt passed last year, leaving me with few options." She met his gaze directly. "I chose this path because I prefer independence to becoming someone's charity case. Teaching, that's a respectable profession. Why leave it?" The school board had a policy against employing married women. Since most female teachers eventually marry, positions are always opening for younger girls willing to work for less pay. She hadn't intended the bitterness that crept into her voice, but Jackson seemed to understand. So when the position disappeared, so did your home. Yes, the school provided lodging. Without it, she shrugged. Options for a woman alone are limited. Jackson nodded slowly, considering her words. Out here, your education will be valuable. The nearest school is in town, too far for daily travel. Some ranching families have talked about building a schoolhouse closer, sharing a teacher. You think I might continue teaching? If you wished it. Though running a ranch household is work enough. This unexpected openness to her maintaining some part of her former identity touched Eliza deeply. She had resigned herself to leaving her teaching life behind completely. Thank you, she said softly, for considering it. He seemed almost embarrassed by her gratitude, rising to clear his plate. I need to finish repairing the north fence this afternoon. Would you like to see more of the ranch? You could ride with me. The invitation surprised her. I'd like that, though I must warn you I'm not an accomplished rider. Daisy's gentle enough. She'll give you no trouble. An hour later, Eliza found herself atop a placid chestnut mare, following Jackson along a path that wound through the heart of Cutter Ranch. He pointed out landmarks, the best grazing areas, the stream that provided their water, the stand of pines where he harvested wood for winter. The vastness of it overwhelmed her, yet there was something exhilarating about seeing the land spread out before them. This would be her home. These mountains, her daily view. This wild beauty, her constant companion. It's breathtaking, she said as they paused atop a small rise. Jackson looked at her rather than the scenery, his expression unreadable. It's demanding, he corrected gently. Beautiful, yes, but it requires everything you have to give. The winters are harsh, the work never ending. You're warning me again. I want you to understand what you're agreeing to. Eliza straightened in her saddle. Mr. Cutter, Jackson, I made my decision before boarding that stagecoach. I'm not a woman who turns back once my path is chosen. For the first time, she saw genuine approval in his eyes, clear and unmistakable. No, he said quietly, I don't believe you are. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the storm's aftermath leaving the world washed clean. Eliza rose early, determined to prepare a proper Sunday dinner for Jackson and his ranch hands. Though they wouldn't be attending church in town, she felt a need to mark the day as special, to begin establishing routines that would form the foundation of their shared life. She found Jackson already awake, seated at the kitchen table with a leather-bound ledger open before him, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Good morning, she offered. I thought I might prepare something special for dinner, to welcome your men. They'd appreciate that. He closed the ledger, revealing columns of neat figures. I've been going over the accounts. Thought you might want to understand the ranch's finances, given our arrangement. The matter-of-fact way he included her in this most private aspect of his business caught her by surprise. You'd share that information with me? You'll be my wife, he said simply, as if that explained everything. In my experience, partnerships work best when both sides understand what they're working with. Partnerships. Not ownership, not control, partnerships. The word choice wasn't lost on Eliza. I'd be grateful to learn, she said, moving to the stove to start breakfast. As she worked, Jackson explained the ranch's financial situation, the costs of running the operation, the seasonal income from cattle sales, the careful balance required to expand slowly without overextending. He spoke with quiet pride of being debt-free, of the improvements planned for the coming year, of the savings set aside for emergencies. Many ranchers operate on credit from one season to the next, he explained. One bad winter, one failed drive to market, and they lose everything. I won't risk what I've built that way. It's impressive, Eliza said, truly meaning it. Your care and foresight. He seemed almost embarrassed by the praise. Just practical sense. After breakfast, Jackson headed out to bring the ranch hands in from the pastures while Eliza prepared the Sunday meal. She found the kitchen well stocked, a haunch of venison in the cold storage, vegetables from the garden, flour and butter for biscuits. Cooking had never been her favorite task, but she had learned adequately from her aunt, and the familiar rhythms of measuring, mixing, and tasting helped settle her nerves about meeting these first neighbors. Midday brought the sound of approaching horses and men's voices. Eliza smoothed her dress. She had changed into one of her better ones, and took a steadying breath before moving to the window. 3 riders approached, Jackson's tall figure easily distinguishable, flanked by 2 others. She watched as they dismounted and cared for their horses, noting the easy camaraderie in their movements, the way Jackson spoke with them, not ordering but conversing as equals, despite being their employer. It told her something about the man she was to marry, something his words alone might not have conveyed. When they entered, Jackson made the introductions. Miss Matthews, this is Tom Wells and Caleb Porter. Gentlemen, Miss Eliza Matthews. Tom was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face that crinkled pleasantly when he smiled. Ma'am, he said, hat in hand. Pleasure to meet the woman brave enough to take on our boss. Caleb was younger, early 20s at most, with an open, boyish face despite his attempt at a serious expression. Miss Matthews, he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable in the presence of a lady. I'm pleased to meet you both, Eliza said warmly. I hope you're hungry. Dinner is nearly ready. Miss Matthews was a school teacher in Kansas City. Jackson informed them as they washed up for the meal. Tom's eyebrows rose. That's so. Well, we could use some civilization around here. The boss tries, but he's still rough around the edges. Speak for yourself, old man, Jackson retorted, but there was no heat in it. The meal proved more relaxed than Eliza had anticipated. Tom had a gift for conversation, filling the air with stories of cattle drives and frontier adventures that had Eliza alternating between laughter and amazement. Caleb gradually shed his shyness, particularly when the conversation turned to horses, his evident passion. Throughout the meal, Eliza found herself watching Jackson, the way he listened more than he spoke, the quiet authority he carried without effort, the rare but genuine smile that transformed his serious face. He was different with his men than he had been with her. More at ease, perhaps, with relationships long established and uncomplicated by marriage arrangements. Miss Matthews, Tom said as they finished the apple cobbler she'd prepared for dessert. I hope you don't mind me saying, but it'll be good having a woman's touch around here again. Again? The word caught her attention immediately. A sudden silence fell over the table. Tom glanced at Jackson, whose expression had gone carefully neutral. I mean, well, most ranches have womenfolk, Tom backpedaled awkwardly. Been a while since my mother was alive, Jackson finished quietly. Tom and my father were partners originally. He's known this place since before I was born. I didn't realize, Eliza said carefully. Jackson had mentioned building the ranch himself, but not that it had been his family's land first. My parents started with almost nothing, Jackson explained, his voice measured. When they died, first my mother, then my father 3 years later, the ranch had fallen into disrepair. I was 22, had been working elsewhere, came back to find most of the cattle sold off, buildings falling down, most of the hands gone except Tom here. Loyalty, Tom said gruffly. Your father was a good man. So that's what you meant, Eliza realized aloud, when you said you built it from almost nothing. You rebuilt your family's legacy." Jackson nodded once, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. She sensed there was more to the story, pain buried deep perhaps, but now was not the time to press. After dinner, the men returned to their duties, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts as she cleared the table. The revelation about Jackson's parents added new dimensions to her understanding of him. This wasn't just land he had purchased and developed. It was his heritage, filled with both painful memories and deep connections. She was still pondering this when Jackson returned, stepping through the door with an armload of firewood. "Your cooking was appreciated," he said, stacking the logs near the fireplace. Tom talked of nothing else on the way back to the pasture. "They're good men," she observed. "Tom especially seems devoted to you." Jackson straightened, brushing wood chips from his shirt. "To the ranch, more than to me. He made a promise to my father." The mention of his father gave Eliza courage to ask what she'd been wondering. "Jackson, why didn't you tell me this was your family's ranch? In your letters, you implied you were the first to work this land." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I said I built this ranch from almost nothing. That was truth." He moved to the window, looking out at the land. What stood here before wasn't worth claiming connection to. "I don't understand." Jackson turned back to her, his expression more open than she'd yet seen it. "My father was a good man who made one terrible mistake. He trusted the wrong people. By the time he died, he'd lost almost everything to drink and gambling debts. The broken-down cabin I mentioned was the house I grew up in, mortgaged to the bank and falling apart." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. "I left home at 17 after one too many fights about his drinking. When word reached me that he died, I came back to find Tom trying to hold things together with no help and no pay. I had some savings, enough to negotiate with the bank, keep 100 acres including the home site." "And you've built it back up piece by piece," Eliza said softly. "Yes." The single word carried the weight of years of struggle and determination. "Everything you see I've earned or rebuilt with my own hands. Maybe that's pride talking, but I wanted you to know me as the man I've made myself, not as the son of a failure." The vulnerability of this confession struck Eliza deeply. This reserved man had shared something deeply personal, trusting her with his pain and his pride. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me." He nodded, seeming almost embarrassed by his openness. "There's one more thing you should know before Tuesday." He hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. "I swore I'd never touch a drop of liquor. I've seen what it can do to a man, to a family. I won't risk becoming my father." The declaration held the weight of both promise and warning. This was a man shaped by his past, determined never to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed his family. "I understand," Eliza said. And she did, perhaps better than he realized. She too had made choices based on what she'd witnessed, her determination to be self-sufficient stemming from watching her aunt's gradual decline into dependence on reluctant relatives. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Tomorrow would bring more preparations for the wedding, more adjustments to her new life. But tonight, the distance between them had narrowed just slightly, with the sharing of truths long held private. Monday arrived with a sense of finality that Eliza couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Jackson Cutter, bound by law and promise to a man she had known for 3 days. The thought sent her stomach fluttering as she dressed, her fingers fumbling with familiar buttons. From her trunk, she removed the dress she had brought for the wedding. Not white, which seemed inappropriate for their practical arrangement, but a soft blue that her aunt had always said brought out her eyes. She shook out the wrinkles as best she could, hanging it near the window where the breeze might freshen it after its long confinement. Jackson had ridden out at dawn, explaining at breakfast that he needed to move some cattle to the south pasture. "A wedding doesn't stop ranch work," he'd said with that almost smile of his. "I'll be back by evening." Alone in the cabin, Eliza found herself alternating between practical preparations and moments of paralyzing doubt. Was she truly ready for this? Could a marriage founded on mutual need rather than love ever become something meaningful? She busied herself with housework, determined to keep such thoughts at bay. The floors were swept, surfaces dusted, windows open to the fresh spring air. In the kitchen, she inventoried supplies, planning meals for the coming week. Such ordinary tasks helped ground her, reminding her that whatever else this marriage might be, it would consist largely of these daily routines. Mid-afternoon found her in the garden, weeding between rows of vegetables. The physical work was satisfying, the connection to the earth somehow reassuring. This land would feed them, sustain them. There was something profound in that thought. "Miss Matthews?" She looked up, startled to find Tom Wells approaching from the direction of the bunkhouse, his weathered hat in his hands. "Mr. Wells," she acknowledged, brushing soil from her hands as she stood. "Is everything all right?" "Just fine, ma'am. Thought you might like some company is all. And well, there's something I wanted to give you before tomorrow." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box, finely crafted with simple carvings around its edges. "It's beautiful," she said, accepting it carefully. "Made it myself. For keeping special things." He shuffled uncomfortably, clearly unused to such gestures. "Tradition says a bride should have something new. Figured this might do." Touched by the unexpected gift, Eliza felt tears threatening. "Thank you, truly." Tom nodded, clearly embarrassed by her emotion. "Boss is a good man," he said abruptly. "Best I've known, despite his father's failings. Wanted you to know that." "I believe he is," she agreed. "He doesn't show much," Tom continued, "but he feels things deep. Has since he was a boy. His mother was the same way. Still waters, but powerful currents underneath." This glimpse of Jackson through someone else's eyes fascinated her. "You knew him as a child?" "Watched him grow up. Saw him leave after that last fight with his father. Saw him come back too after the old man died. Boy had every right to sell what was left and wash his hands of this place. Instead, he worked himself half to death rebuilding it." Tom shook his head, remembering. Never complained, never asked for help, though God knows he needed it. "Why did he stay?" Eliza asked. "After everything?" Tom considered this, squinting at the distant mountains. "Land gets in your blood. And maybe he needed to prove something. To his father's memory, or to himself. That he could succeed where his father failed." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Tom cleared his throat. "Anyway, just wanted you to have that, and to say we're all glad you're here. Place needs a woman's touch." After Tom left, Eliza returned to the cabin, the wooden box cradled carefully in her hands. Inside, she found her mother's locket, the only keepsake she had from her parents, and placed it in the box alongside the few letters she'd received from Jackson during their correspondence. Small treasures, markers of the path that had led her here. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening across the yard. Eliza prepared dinner, finding comfort in the rhythm of cooking. As sunset approached, she heard hoofbeats in the yard and moved to the window to see Jackson dismounting, his movements betraying weariness after a long day's work. She met him at the door with a cup of coffee, prepared the way she'd observed he liked it. "Thank you," he said, genuine gratitude in his voice as he accepted the cup. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a small contact that nonetheless sent warmth through her. Productive day? She asked as he removed his hat and coat. Mostly. He sank into a chair, extending his long legs toward the fireplace where a small flame danced. Fence needed mending in the south corner, always something. Ranch work never ends, she observed, echoing his own words from earlier. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Quick study. They ate together, the silence between them more comfortable than it had been previously. Jackson spoke of his plans for expanding the herd, of the new breeding stock he hoped to purchase in the fall. Eliza found herself genuinely interested, asking questions that revealed her growing understanding of the ranch's operations. After the meal, as Eliza cleared the dishes, Jackson remained at the table, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I have something for you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's not much, but—" He extended his hand, revealing a simple gold band resting on his palm. "It was my mother's," he explained. "If you'd prefer something new, I understand. We could ride to town after the ceremony, visit the jeweler." Eliza stared at the ring, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. This wasn't merely a ring, it was a piece of his past, a connection to the family he had lost and the heritage he had fought to reclaim. "It's perfect," she said softly, meaning it. "I would be honored to wear it." Relief crossed his features, quickly masked. "Good. That's good." He closed his hand around the ring once more, returning it to his pocket. "Reverend Taylor should arrive by noon tomorrow. The ceremony won't take long." "I'll be ready," she assured him. "Eliza." Her name on his lips still sounded new, unfamiliar. "I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing. Coming out here, agreeing to this arrangement. I know it's not what most women dream of." The vulnerability in his voice moved her. "What did you dream of, Jackson?" she asked gently. "When you thought of marriage?" He looked startled by the question, as if no one had ever asked about his dreams before. "I didn't for a long time. The ranch took everything I had." He paused, considering. "But lately I've thought about continuity. Building something that would outlast me. Children someday, to inherit what I've rebuilt." His honesty touched something deep within her. This wasn't romantic love, but it was deeply human. The desire to create meaning, to leave something of value behind. "Those are good dreams," she said. "Worthy ones." "And you?" he asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. "What did you dream of?" The question deserved honesty in return. "Security, yes, but also partnership. Someone who would see me as I am, value what I can contribute." She met his gaze directly. "I think perhaps those dreams might be compatible." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that transformed his face. Not quite a smile, but the closest he had come. "I believe they might," he agreed quietly. Later, alone in her room, Eliza opened Tom's wooden box and touched each item within. The locket, the letters, and now a pressed wildflower she had picked from the garden. Tomorrow she would add Jackson's mother's ring to these treasures, these markers of her journey. Outside her window, the vast Wyoming sky blazed with stars, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. Tomorrow, under that same sky, she would make promises to a man she was only beginning to know. The thought should have terrified her. Yet she found a strange peace settling over her. Whatever came after, she would face it with the same determination that had brought her here, to this remote ranch and this quiet man with his careful words and hidden depths. Sleep came more easily than she had expected, deep and dreamless under the blanket of stars. Tuesday dawned bright and clear, the air crisp with early spring freshness. Eliza woke with the sun, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. Today she would become Mrs. Jackson Cutter, binding her life to a man she had met less than a week ago. She bathed carefully with water heated on the stove, washing her hair and letting it dry by the open window as she laid out her blue dress. From her trunk, she removed the few pieces of jewelry she possessed: pearl earrings that had been her mother's, a simple silver bracelet given to her by her aunt. As she dressed, she could hear Jackson moving about the cabin, his footsteps a steady, reassuring rhythm. They had maintained a careful distance since breakfast, both seemingly aware of the momentous transition the day would bring. The blue dress fit well, its modest cut complemented by the gentle color that brought out the golden highlights in her brown hair and emphasized the blue of her eyes. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant knot, pinning it securely before adding the pearl earrings. Looking in the small mirror hung on her bedroom wall, Eliza barely recognized herself, not because she looked particularly different, but because the woman who stared back at her stood at the threshold of a completely new life. No longer Miss Matthews, the school teacher, but soon to be Mrs. Cutter, rancher's wife, mistress of this remote homestead. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her reflections. "Miss Matthews," Jackson's voice unusually hesitant. "Reverend Taylor's wagon is approaching. Thought you might want to know." "Thank you," she called back. "I'll be out shortly." She took a final look in the mirror, smoothed her dress, and drew a deep breath. Whatever came after today, she would face it with dignity and determination. She had chosen this path with clear eyes, and she would walk it without regrets. When she emerged from her room, she found Jackson waiting in the main room, dressed in what was clearly his finest clothing: a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He had trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly, the effect transforming him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. He turned at her entrance and for a moment simply stared, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite name. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, the words clearly not coming easily to him, but sincere nonetheless. "Thank you," she replied, a flush warming her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." The sound of wagon wheels and horse hooves outside saved them from further awkwardness. Jackson moved to the door, opening it to reveal a lean, elderly man climbing down from a weather-beaten wagon. "Jackson Cutter," the man called, his voice surprisingly robust for his age. "Right on time, as always." "Reverend Taylor," Jackson greeted him, stepping outside to help with his bag. "Good journey?" "The Lord provides good roads when his business needs doing," the Reverend replied cheerfully, his eyes lighting on Eliza as she appeared in the doorway. "And this must be the bride-to-be." "Eliza Matthews," she confirmed, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming all this way." "Pleasure's mine, Miss Matthews. Always happy to see love blooming in these remote parts." Eliza exchanged a quick glance with Jackson, neither correcting the Reverend's romantic assumption. Some things were private, understood only between them. Reverend Taylor was a whirlwind of energy despite his years, sweeping into the cabin and immediately beginning preparations for the ceremony. He arranged them before the fireplace, positioning a small table between them with his Bible open upon it. "Tom and Caleb will stand as witnesses," Jackson explained, nodding toward the door where the two ranch hands appeared, both uncomfortably clean and dressed in their Sunday best. "Perfect," the Reverend declared. "A proper ceremony needs witnesses." He pulled a worn leather book from his bag. "Now then, I believe in keeping things simple but meaningful. The Lord doesn't require fancy words, just honest hearts." The simplicity of the arrangement suited Eliza. There was no pretense here, no elaborate performance for an audience. Just 5 people in a sunlit room, witnessing a commitment made with clear-eyed understanding. Reverend Taylor opened his Bible, peering over his spectacles at the couple before him. "Marriage," he began, "is a sacred bond established by our Creator as a foundation for family and community. It is not entered into lightly, but with sober consideration and mutual respect. The familiar words washed over Eliza as she stood facing Jackson, close enough to see the varied blues in his eyes, the small scar near his right eyebrow she hadn't noticed before, the way his chest rose and fell with carefully controlled breaths. "Jackson Cutter, do you take this woman, Eliza Matthews, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to protect and provide for her, to remain faithful to her alone, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" Jackson's eyes held hers steadily. "I do," he said, his deep voice unwavering. "And do you, Eliza Matthews, take this man, Jackson Cutter, to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to support and care for him, to remain faithful to him alone, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" The moment stretched, pregnant with significance. This was no ordinary wedding vow, recited by a couple already bound by love and courtship. This was a promise made with clear understanding of what was being offered and accepted: security, partnership, the possibility of something that might, with time and care, grow into more. "I do," she said clearly, her voice steady, despite the emotions swirling within her. "The ring, if you have one," Reverend Taylor prompted. Jackson reached into his pocket, producing the simple gold band he had shown her the night before. Taking her left hand, he slid the ring onto her finger, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "With this ring," he said quietly, "I thee wed." The band felt strange yet right, a physical symbol of the commitment they had just made, not merely a business arrangement anymore, but a marriage sanctified before witnesses and God. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Taylor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He beamed at them both. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Cutter." For a moment, Eliza thought Jackson might decline this traditional conclusion, given the nature of their arrangement. But after a brief hesitation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers, a chaste, brief kiss that nonetheless sent unexpected warmth spreading through her. Then it was done. She was Mrs. Jackson Cutter, bound by law and promise to this quiet, steadfast man with careful words and hidden depths. Caleb and Tom offered awkward but sincere congratulations, then tactfully made themselves scarce as Reverend Taylor joined them for a simple wedding meal. The older man dominated the conversation, sharing stories of other weddings he had performed across the territory, some in far more unusual circumstances than theirs. "Had one couple who couldn't wait for me to arrive," he chuckled. "Rode 40 miles through a snowstorm to find me, then got married right there in the general store with the shopkeeper and his wife as witnesses." His jovial presence eased the tension that might otherwise have fallen over the meal, giving both Eliza and Jackson space to adjust to their new reality without uncomfortable scrutiny. As the afternoon waned, the Reverend prepared to depart, needing to reach his next destination before nightfall. "I'll be back through in 2 weeks," he told them as Jackson helped him to his wagon. "Expect to see you both at Sunday services when you can make it to town." After the wagon disappeared down the road, a strange silence fell over the ranch. Caleb and Tom had returned to their duties, leaving the newlyweds alone with the adjustment to their new status. "Would you like to walk?" Jackson asked suddenly. "There's a place I'd like to show you." Grateful for the suggestion, Eliza agreed. They followed a path that wound behind the ranch house, climbing gradually up a gentle slope until they reached a small plateau overlooking the property. From this vantage point, the ranch spread before them, the house and barn, the corrals and pastures, the distant cattle grazing peacefully, all bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. "My mother used to come here," Jackson said quietly, breaking their companionable silence. "When things were difficult, she said it helped her remember what was worth fighting for." The sharing of this personal memory felt like a gift, more intimate somehow than the kiss they had exchanged during the ceremony. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, taking in the vastness of the land that was now her home. "Thank you for showing me." "It's yours now too," he replied simply. "All of it." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they stood together in silence, two people bound by promises made and possibilities still unfurling before them. Evening descended on their wedding day, bringing with it a new awkwardness neither had anticipated. As they returned from the overlook to the ranch house, now transformed by their changed status, Eliza found herself hyper-aware of Jackson's presence. The sound of his breathing, the careful distance he maintained between them, the way he moved with deliberate consideration of her space. Supper was a quiet affair, both of them navigating this new reality with cautious words and careful movements. The simple gold band on Eliza's finger caught the lamplight as she served the meal, a constant reminder of promises made and a future yet undefined. "I've been thinking," Jackson said as they finished eating, "about the sleeping arrangements." Eliza's heart quickened despite herself. They had never discussed this aspect of their arrangement explicitly, beyond his assurance that she would have her own room for as long as you wish it. "You should keep your room," he continued, his eyes meeting hers briefly before focusing on his coffee cup. "Nothing needs to change in that regard. Not unless you want it to." Relief mingled with something like disappointment, a complicated emotion she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your consideration." He nodded once, accepting her response without further comment. Later, as she prepared for bed in her own room, still her room, not theirs, Eliza found herself turning their conversation over in her mind. His careful respect for her boundaries both reassured and unsettled her. What exactly had she expected? What did she want? Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with fragments of the day. The weight of Jackson's mother's ring sliding onto her finger, the brief pressure of his lips against hers, the view from the overlook with the ranch spread below them. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through her window and the familiar sounds of Jackson already moving about the cabin. For a moment, Eliza could almost believe nothing had changed. Then her gaze fell on the ring glinting on her left hand, and reality rushed back. She was Mrs. Cutter now, with all the responsibilities and privileges that entailed. She dressed quickly and found Jackson in the kitchen, coffee already brewed and breakfast underway. He looked up as she entered, something in his expression softening. "Good morning," he said. The simple greeting somehow weighted with new significance. "Good morning," she replied, moving to help with the meal preparations. They worked around each other with growing ease, establishing a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. As they ate, Jackson outlined the day ahead. He needed to check on a heifer that might be calving soon, then ride the north boundary to ensure no fences had been damaged in the recent storm. "I thought I might inventory the pantry today," Eliza offered. "Begin planning what we'll need from town on the next supply run." He nodded approvingly. "Good idea. List is on the shelf by the door, items we usually purchase. Feel free to add whatever you think necessary." This simple exchange, the mundane planning of household management, somehow cemented their new reality more than the ceremony had. This was marriage, the daily sharing of responsibilities, the mutual consideration of needs, the building of a shared life through countless small decisions. After breakfast, Jackson prepared to ride out, gathering his hat and gloves by the door. For a moment, he hesitated, seeming uncertain about the proper way to take his leave. "I'll see you this evening," he said finally, settling his hat on his head. "Be careful," Eliza responded, the words coming naturally despite their unfamiliarity. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." Alone in the cabin, Eliza set about her tasks with determined efficiency. The pantry inventory revealed a well-stocked but utilitarian selection. Plenty of staples, but few luxuries. To Jackson's list of usual supplies, she added items that would bring small comforts to their table. Proper tea, some spices, a few ingredients for baking. The domestic work filled her morning, but by afternoon restlessness drove her outside. The spring day was too beautiful to spend entirely indoors. The kitchen garden needed attention, and Eliza found satisfaction in the simple labor of turning soil and pulling weeds. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't immediately notice the approaching rider, not Jackson, but a stranger on a dappled gray horse. The man reined in near the garden, tipping his hat as Eliza straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, his voice carrying a hint of southern drawl. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Can I help you?" Eliza asked, suddenly conscious of being alone on the property. "Looking for Jackson Cutter. He around?" "My husband is checking the north boundary," she replied, the word husband still new and strange on her tongue. "He should return before evening. Can I give him a message?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly at her words. "Your husband? Well now, that's interesting news. Jackson Cutter, married." He studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Mitchell Holloway, ma'am. Own the Triple H Ranch to the east. Jackson and I have some business to discuss about water rights." Something in his manner put Eliza on edge, a certain calculation behind his friendly expression perhaps, or the way his gaze seemed to assess not just her but the property around them. "I'll let him know you called, Mr. Holloway. Would you like to leave a more specific message?" "Just tell him I stopped by. I'll be back." With a tip of his hat, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving Eliza with an unsettled feeling she couldn't quite name. When Jackson returned late in the afternoon, leading his horse toward the stables with weary steps, Eliza met him in the yard, eager to share the encounter with their neighbor. "Mitchell Holloway was here," she said without preamble. "Looking for you about water rights." Jackson's expression darkened. "What did he want?" "He didn't say specifically, just that he'd come back." Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. "Did he say anything else? To you?" "No, though he seemed surprised to learn you had married." "I'll bet he was," Jackson muttered, turning to unsaddle his horse. The tension in his shoulders told Eliza there was more to the story than a simple neighbor dispute. "Is there something I should know about Mr. Holloway?" she asked, following him into the stable. Jackson worked in silence for a moment, methodically caring for his horse before answering. "Mitchell Holloway has been trying to buy the southeast corner of our property for 3 years. Claims he needs access to the stream that runs through it, though he has plenty of water on his own land." "Why does he want it so badly?" "The stream is consistent year-round, never runs dry even in drought years. Valuable in this territory." Jackson hung the saddle on its rack with careful precision. "But it's more than that. He's the kind of man who always wants what isn't his, and he's used to getting his way." The implication was clear. Holloway was not someone to be trusted, and his interest went beyond normal neighborly business. "I see," Eliza said thoughtfully. "Should I be concerned if he returns when you're not here?" Jackson turned to her then, his expression softening with concern. "You handled him just fine today. But yes, be cautious. Holloway can be persistent." The conversation shifted their dynamics subtly but significantly. This wasn't just household management they were sharing now, but the deeper concerns of the ranch and its security. Jackson was including her in matters beyond domestic arrangements, treating her as a true partner. That evening, after a simple supper, they sat together by the fireplace, Jackson in his usual chair with a ledger book, Eliza nearby with mending she had discovered needed attention. The domestic scene felt both ordinary and extraordinary. the mundane reality of marriage taking shape around them with each passing hour. I added some items to the supply list, Eliza mentioned, breaking their companionable silence. Nothing extravagant, just a few things to make meals more interesting. Whatever you think best, Jackson replied, looking up from his figures. You're the one doing the cooking now. I thought I might try baking bread tomorrow, she ventured. My aunt taught me a good recipe. That would be... He seemed to search for the right word. Nice. The simple exchange, ordinary as it was, carried the weight of their new reality. This was their life now. Discussions of bread recipes and supply lists, shared concerns about troublesome neighbors, the quiet companionship of evening tasks done side by side. As darkness settled fully outside, Jackson closed his ledger and stood. I should check on that heifer before turning in. She was looking close this morning. Would you like me to come with you? Eliza offered impulsively. I've never seen a calf being born. Surprise crossed his features, quickly replaced by something warmer. It might be a long wait, and messy. I don't mind, she said, already reaching for her shawl. I'd like to learn. Together they walked to the barn, lantern light guiding their way through the darkness. The night air was cool, stars emerging in the vast canvas above them. As they walked, their shoulders occasionally brushed, neither pulling away from the casual contact. This too was marriage, Eliza realized. The gradual dissolving of barriers, the slow building of trust, the shared experiences that would, day by day, stitch their separate lives into one. The barn was warm and fragrant with the scent of hay and animals, a welcome contrast to the cool night air. Jackson hung the lantern on a hook and led Eliza to a stall where a young heifer lay on her side, sides heaving with labored breaths. First calf, he explained quietly, kneeling beside the animal. Sometimes they need help. Eliza knelt beside him, mindless of her skirts on the straw-covered floor. What can I do? Just watch for now. I'll let you know if I need assistance. His voice was gentle as he checked the heifer, his large hands surprisingly delicate as they examined the distressed animal. She's been at it a while. Calf might be positioned wrong. For the next hour, Eliza witnessed a side of Jackson she hadn't seen before. He spoke continuously to the heifer in low, soothing tones, his patience seemingly inexhaustible as he worked to help bring new life into the world. When he did need her help, he explained clearly what to do, never showing frustration when her inexperienced hands fumbled. Finally, with a slick rush of fluid, the calf emerged, spindly-legged and wet, but unmistakably alive. Jackson quickly cleared its nose and mouth, rubbing it vigorously with a handful of straw. Come on, little one, he murmured. Your mama worked too hard for you to give up now. As if in response, the calf gave a weak shake of its head and tried to raise it. Jackson's face broke into a genuine smile, the first full smile Eliza had seen from him, transforming his features completely. There we go, he said with satisfaction. First breath is always the hardest. The heifer was already turning to her calf, maternal instinct overcoming exhaustion. Jackson guided the newborn to its mother's side, where it struggled to stand on wobbly legs, driven by the ancient instinct to nurse. It's miraculous, Eliza breathed, watching as the calf found its footing and began to suckle. Every time, Jackson agreed, the softness in his expression making him look younger, unburdened. No matter how many calves I've seen born, it never gets ordinary. They remained in the barn until they were certain both mother and calf were doing well, Jackson checking them periodically while Eliza marveled at the new life unfolding before them. When they finally returned to the house, the night had deepened, stars blazing overhead in the clear mountain air. Thank you, Eliza said as they reached the porch, for letting me be part of that. Jackson paused, his hand on the door latch. "Thank you for wanting to be," he replied simply. The words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested, an acknowledgement of her willingness to embrace all aspects of ranch life, even the messy, difficult parts. That night, Eliza dreamed of calves on wobbly legs and Jackson's rare, transformative smile. The following days established a rhythm to their shared life. Mornings began with breakfast together, planning the day's work before Jackson headed out to the ranch tasks while Eliza managed the household. Evenings brought them back together, sharing the events of their day over supper before settling by the fire, each occupied with their own tasks but increasingly comfortable in their shared space. Small changes accumulated. Jackson began removing his boots at the door without prompting. Eliza learned how he took his coffee and had it waiting. When he came in from early chores, they developed a shorthand for passing dishes at meals that required few words. The awkwardness of those first days gradually gave way to a comfortable familiarity. A week into their marriage, Jackson announced it was time for the monthly supply run to Red Rock. "I thought we might both go," he suggested over breakfast. "Give you a chance to see the town, meet some people, unless you'd rather stay here." Eliza recognized the offer for what it was, not just a practical outing, but an introduction to the wider community as his wife. "I'd like that very much," she replied, already anticipating the change of scenery. They set out early the next morning in the wagon, the spring day perfect for travel with clear skies and mild temperatures. The journey gave them hours of uninterrupted conversation, and Eliza found Jackson more talkative than usual as he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory. "That ridge there," he indicated a distant line of hills, "marks the boundary of Holloway's land. Triple H Ranch runs all the way to the Eastern Valley." "It seems large," Eliza observed. "One of the biggest spreads in the territory. Holloway's father started with nothing, built it up over 40 years. There was grudging respect in Jackson's voice despite his evident dislike of the neighbor. "Mitchell inherited it all 5 years ago. Been trying to expand ever since." "At your expense?" "And others. 3 smaller ranches have already sold to him when they hit hard times." Jackson's hands tightened on the reins. "He's not content with what he has, always wanting more." The conversation shifted to pleasanter topics as they continued their journey, but Eliza filed away this information, building her understanding of the local dynamics that affected their ranch. Red Rock proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road, a single street lined with essential businesses serving the surrounding ranches. The general store, saloon, blacksmith, and small church made up the town's core, with a scattering of houses radiating outward. Their arrival at the general store caused a minor sensation. News of Jackson Cutter taking a wife had clearly spread, and curious eyes followed them as he helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Peterson," Jackson greeted the storekeeper's wife, a plump, pleasant-faced woman who hurried forward to meet them. "This is my wife, Eliza." "Well," Mrs. Peterson beamed, clasping Eliza's hands warmly. "We've all been so curious since Reverend Taylor spread the news. Welcome to Red Rock, Mrs. Cutter." The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions as townspeople found reasons to visit the store while they shopped. Eliza met the doctor and his wife, the blacksmith, the banker, and what seemed like every rancher's wife within 20 miles. Everyone was cordial, if transparently curious, about the woman who had married the reserved Jackson Cutter. "You've caused quite a stir," Jackson commented as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "Half the county found business in town today." "They seem nice," Eliza said diplomatically, though she had noticed the scrutiny beneath the welcomes. These people were reserving judgment, waiting to see what kind of woman she proved to be. They were nearly finished loading when a voice called from across the street. "Cutter, thought that was your wagon." Mitchell Holloway approached, flanked by two men who carried themselves with the easy confidence of hired guns rather than ranch hands. Up close, Holloway was more imposing than he had appeared during his brief visit to the ranch. Tall, expensively dressed, with the cultivated charm of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Holloway," Jackson acknowledged coolly. "Something you need?" "Just being neighborly." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes as they flicked to Eliza. "Mrs. Cutter, a pleasure to see you again. I trust married life is treating you well?" "Very well, thank you," she replied politely, noting how Jackson had positioned himself slightly between her and Holloway. "I was sorry to miss you when I called at your ranch," Holloway continued, addressing Jackson. "That matter of the water rights needs resolving." "Nothing to resolve," Jackson said flatly. "The stream runs through my property, has for 40 years. Holloway's smile tightened. "Everyone has their price, Cutter, especially with a new wife to consider." His gaze lingered on Eliza in a way that made her skin crawl. "A woman deserves certain comforts, certain securities." "My wife has everything she needs," Jackson replied, his voice deceptively calm, though Eliza could sense the tension radiating from him. "For now, perhaps." Holloway shrugged elegantly. "But circumstances change. My offer stands. Think about it." With a tip of his hat to Eliza that managed to be both courteous and vaguely threatening, he turned and strolled away, his men following. The drive home was quieter than their journey to town, both of them unsettled by the encounter. As the ranch came into view, silhouetted against the setting sun, Eliza broke their silence. "He wants more than just water rights, doesn't he?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "Holloway wants everything. The stream is just his current excuse." "What will he do when you continue to refuse?" "I don't know," Jackson admitted. "Nothing good." The wagon rolled into the yard as dusk deepened around them. As Jackson helped her down, his hands lingered at her waist longer than necessary, a protective gesture that sent warmth through her despite the troubling encounter. "I won't let him threaten what we're building here," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I promise you that." Standing there in the fading light, Eliza realized that what we're building encompassed far more than the ranch itself. It included this fragile, growing bond between them. Not yet love, perhaps, but something with the potential to become just as strong and enduring. "I know," she replied simply, placing her hand over his where it still rested at her waist. "We won't let him." "We." The word hung between them, bridging the careful distance they had maintained. Together, they turned toward their home as the first stars appeared overhead. Spring advanced across the ranch, painting the hills with wildflowers and fresh grass. As April turned to May, Eliza found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. The routines that had once seemed foreign now felt natural, rising with the sun, tending to household tasks, while Jackson worked with the cattle, preparing meals that brought them together at the beginning and end of each day. Their relationship evolved in small but significant ways. Jackson began sharing more of the ranch's operations with her, teaching her to read weather signs, explaining his breeding plans for the herd, including her in decisions about improvements to the property. For her part, Eliza took increasing interest in the business side, offering suggestions from her teaching experience about organizing the ledgers and tracking expenses more efficiently. They still maintained separate bedrooms, though the careful distance between them had narrowed considerably. Casual touches became more frequent, his hand at the small of her back as they walked together, her fingers brushing his when passing a cup of coffee, shoulders touching as they sat side by side reviewing the accounts in the evening. One morning, as Eliza hung laundry in the yard, enjoying the warmth of the spring sunshine, she spotted Jackson returning early from his rounds, riding faster than usual. Something in his posture alerted her that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted, his expression grim. Found 3 of our cattle dead in the north pasture, he replied, removing his hat and wiping his brow. Shot. Shot? Eliza repeated, stunned. Who would do such a thing? Jackson's jaw tightened. Can't prove anything, but I have my suspicions. Holloway, she said. Not a question, but a conclusion. He nodded once. A warning, most likely. His way of saying the offer won't stay open forever. We should report this to the sheriff, Eliza suggested, anger rising at this attack on their livelihood. Sheriff Daniels is Holloway's second cousin, Jackson replied with a bitter smile, and 3 dead cattle isn't enough to risk going against the most powerful man in the county. The helplessness in his voice stirred something protective in Eliza. This proud, self-sufficient man was facing an enemy he couldn't simply confront directly, and it was clearly eating at him. What can we do? She asked. Be more vigilant. I'll have Tom and Caleb take shifts watching the herds at night. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. And I need to ride the boundaries more often, check for signs of trespassers. I want to help, Eliza said firmly. Teach me to shoot. The request clearly surprised him. Shoot? Yes. If I'm to be alone here while you're checking the boundaries, I should be able to defend myself in the ranch. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not afraid, Jackson. I just need the skills. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll start this afternoon. True to his word, after the midday meal, Jackson retrieved a rifle from the locked cabinet in their bedroom and led Eliza to a clearing behind the barn. He explained the weapon's mechanisms carefully, demonstrating how to load, aim, and fire with the same patient thoroughness he brought to all his teaching. Remember, he said, standing close behind her as she took aim at a row of cans he'd set up on the fence, breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. Squeeze, nice and smooth. Eliza was acutely aware of his proximity, his chest nearly touching her back, his arms alongside hers as he adjusted her grip. The first shot went wild, the recoil stronger than she'd expected, but by the 5th attempt, she had knocked a can from its perch, earning a rare word of praise from her husband. Good, very good, he said, genuine approval in his voice. You're a natural. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. They practiced until her shoulder ached from the recoil, Jackson patiently correcting her form and offering encouragement with each improvement. As days passed, their vigilance proved necessary. Fence lines were cut twice more, and another calf disappeared, presumed stolen. Jackson grew increasingly tense, spending longer hours riding the boundaries and returning home exhausted each evening. One night, nearly 2 weeks after the first incident, Eliza woke to the sound of horses in the yard, multiple riders approaching at speed. She slipped from her bed and moved to the window, heart racing as she made out several mounted figures in the moonlight. Jackson was already up, pulling on his boots in the main room when she emerged from her bedroom. Stay inside, he instructed, reaching for his rifle. Lock the door behind me. Jackson, please, Eliza. The rare plea in his voice stopped her protest. I need to know you're safe. She nodded reluctantly, watching as he stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but not raised. Through the window, she could see 4 riders circling in the yard, their faces obscured by the darkness. Cutter, one called, not Holloway's voice, but one of his men. Got a message for you. Deliver it and be on your way, Jackson replied evenly, though Eliza could see the tension in his stance. Mr. Holloway says his patience is running out. Says to tell you the price of water rights just went up on account of all the trouble lately. The man's laugh was ugly in the night air. Says next time, it won't be just cattle that get shot. The threat hung in the air for a heartbeat before one of the riders fired, not at Jackson, but at the window near where Eliza stood. The glass shattered, sending her stumbling backward with a startled cry as fragments sprayed across the room. Jackson's rifle came up instantly, but the riders were already wheeling their horses, galloping away into the darkness with mocking laughter trailing behind them. "Eliza!" Jackson was through the door in seconds, fear raw in his voice as he found her picking herself up from the floor. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him, though her hands trembled as she brushed glass from her nightdress. "Just startled." He pulled her into his arms then, an instinctive reaction that surprised them both. For a moment they stood frozen, the embrace unfamiliar territory in their careful relationship. Then Eliza felt the tension drain from him as he held her closer, his face buried in her hair. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have anticipated this, should have been better prepared." "You couldn't have known," she replied, allowing herself to lean into his strength, to draw comfort from the solid warmth of him. "It's not your fault." They remained like that longer than necessity required, neither willing to be the first to pull away. When they finally separated, something had shifted between them, a barrier fallen, a new understanding reached without words. Jackson insisted on moving her mattress into the main room for what remained of the night, unwilling to leave her in the bedroom with its broken window. As dawn approached, Eliza found herself watching him sleep in his chair nearby, the worry lines of his face softened in repose, his hand still resting on his rifle across his lap. This man had promised to protect her when they wed, a practical promise that had seemed almost formal at the time. Now she understood the depth of that commitment, not just words spoken before a preacher, but a fundamental aspect of who Jackson Cutter was. Morning brought Tom and Caleb hurrying to the ranch house, having heard the shots from the bunkhouse but arriving too late to intercept the riders. "This has gone too far," Tom declared, his weathered face creased with anger as he helped Jackson board up the broken window. "Threatening a woman in her own home, even Holloway should know better." "What will you do, boss?" Caleb asked, his young face serious as he swept up the glass shards. Jackson looked to Eliza before answering, including her in the decision. "We need allies," he said finally. "Other ranchers who've had trouble with Holloway. Together, we might have enough influence to counter his." "The Matthews place," Tom suggested, "and the Wilsons. Both have refused to sell to Holloway despite his pressuring." "I'll ride out today," Jackson decided, "see if they're willing to stand together." "And I'll come with you," Eliza said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "A united front should include both of us." Surprise flickered across Jackson's face, quickly replaced by something that might have been pride. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Both of us." As they prepared to leave, gathering supplies for the journey to neighboring ranches, Eliza caught Jackson watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking," he replied slowly, "that when I sent for a wife, I expected someone practical, someone who could help manage the household." His eyes held hers steadily. "I never expected someone brave enough to stand beside me against men like Holloway." The simple words, spoken with such evident sincerity, touched something deep within her. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we're both finding more in this arrangement than we anticipated." The acknowledgement hung between them, neither denial nor declaration, but a recognition of the truth they were both coming to understand, that what had begun as a practical partnership was evolving into something neither had dared to hope for. The Matthews Ranch lay a half-day's ride to the west, a modest spread nestled against the foothills. Unlike the Cutter property with its strategic water access, the Matthews place survived on careful management of limited resources, a fact that made them another likely target for Holloway's expansion plans. As they rode side by side, Eliza found herself studying Jackson's profile against the backdrop of endless sky. In the weeks since their wedding, she had come to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tightening around his eyes when concerned, the barely perceptible softening of his mouth when pleased. Now, despite the tension of their situation, she noted a calm determination in his bearing. "Tell me about the Matthews family," she requested, breaking their companionable silence. "Good people. Robert Matthews worked with my father years ago before starting his own place. His son David runs it now with his wife Sarah. They have 3 young children." Jackson adjusted his hat against the midday sun. "They've refused Holloway's offers twice that I know of." "At what cost?" "Lost a barn to fire last year. Lightning, according to the sheriff." The skepticism in his voice made clear what he actually believed. "But they've held on." When they arrived at the Matthews Ranch, they were greeted by a tall, broad-shouldered man who looked to be in his early 30s, a shotgun held casually but visibly in one hand. "Cutter," he called, recognition and relief evident as he lowered the weapon. "Been a while." "Matthews," Jackson returned, dismounting and helping Eliza down from her horse. "This is my wife, Eliza." David Matthews didn't bother hiding his surprise. "Wife? Well, now that's news." He extended a calloused hand to Eliza with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the territory, Mrs. Cutter. Sarah will be pleased to meet you. Not many women out this way." Inside the modest ranch house, they were welcomed by Sarah Matthews, a capable-looking woman with kind eyes, and 3 curious children peeking from behind her skirts. After introductions and refreshments, the conversation turned to the purpose of their visit. "Holloway's men shot 3 of our cattle," Jackson explained without preamble. "Last night they came to the house, fired at a window, made it clear the threats will escalate." David's expression darkened. "Bastards getting bolder. Started with our fences, then the barn. Last month, one of our hands was beaten on the road to town. Robbery, they called it, though nothing was taken." "He wants us isolated," Sarah added, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. "Frightened and alone, easy to pick off one by one." "Which is why we need to stand together," Jackson said. "The Wilsons, too, if they're willing. Present a united front." "Against Holloway and half the county officials in his pocket?" David sounded skeptical, though not dismissive. "Numbers change things," Eliza interjected. "One rancher complaining about Holloway can be ignored. 3 or 4 families with similar stories. That becomes harder to dismiss." Sarah nodded approvingly. "She's right. Reverend Taylor was saying just last Sunday that the territory's changing. New governor wants to clean up the corruption before statehood discussions begin. Might be willing to listen if enough respectable citizens speak up." The conversation continued as they outlined a plan. Gather evidence of Holloway's tactics. Document the pattern of intimidation. Prepare a formal complaint to both the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office. By the time they left, the Matthews had committed to the alliance, promising to reach out to the Wilson family as well. "That went better than I expected," Jackson admitted as they rode toward home. "David's always been cautious about rocking the boat." "Having children changes your perspective," Eliza observed. "Makes you think about the future, what kind of world you're building for them." Jackson glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "It does." The subject of children had not been explicitly discussed between them, though it had been implied in their original arrangement. Now, with their relationship evolving beyond practical convenience, the possibility seemed both more immediate and more complicated. They rode in thoughtful silence until they crested a hill overlooking their ranch in the distance. The sight of home, for it truly felt like home to Eliza now, brought a sense of fierce protectiveness. This land, this life they were building together, was worth fighting for. "We should reach the ranch before sunset," Jackson noted, squinting at the western horizon. "Good timing." As they drew closer, however, Eliza sensed something was wrong. A plume of smoke rose from the direction of their property, too much smoke for a normal cook fire or controlled burn. "Jackson," she said urgently, pointing. He had already seen it, his body tensing as he urged his horse to a faster pace. "Stay behind me," he instructed, though he knew she wouldn't heed the warning. They rode hard the remaining distance, dread building with each hoofbeat. As they approached the ranch, the source of the smoke became horrifyingly clear. The barn was ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the wooden structure while dark smoke billowed upward. Tom and Caleb were already battling the fire with buckets from the well, their faces streaked with soot and desperation. Jackson dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, rushing to join them. "The horses?" he shouted above the roar of the flames. "Got 'em out," Tom called back, passing him a bucket. "Cattle were in the south pasture, thank God." Eliza joined the bucket line without hesitation, her arms aching as she passed water from person to person. The heat was intense, singeing her eyebrows and making each breath painful. For nearly an hour they fought the blaze, but it was clear from the beginning that the barn could not be saved. Their efforts focused on preventing the fire from spreading to the house or nearby structures. When it was finally over, they stood exhausted and filthy, watching the smoldering remains of what had been a solid, well-built barn. In the gathering dusk, the destruction seemed even more devastating, months of work and valuable resources reduced to charred timber and ash. "It was deliberate," Tom reported grimly, showing Jackson a kerosene-soaked rag he'd found near the origin point. "Found this before it burned completely. Someone wanted to make sure it caught quick." "Holloway," Jackson said, the name like a curse on his lips. "Had to be," Tom agreed. "Caleb saw riders heading east about an hour before we spotted the flames. Didn't think much of it at the time." "East toward Triple H," Jackson confirmed, his face hardening in the firelight. Eliza placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension vibrating through him. "This changes nothing about our plan," she said quietly. "If anything, it proves how important it is that we stand together against him." Jackson covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from her steadiness. "You're right. But I don't know how much more of this we can withstand. The barn will take months to rebuild, money we can't easily spare." "We'll manage," she assured him, the "we" no longer awkward or uncertain, but a simple statement of fact. "The Matthews will spread the word. Others will join us." Later, after washing away the smoke and grime, they sat at the kitchen table planning their next steps. The destruction of the barn necessitated immediate changes. Livestock needed shelter, supplies required reorganization, work patterns had to be adjusted. "We should move the remaining cattle to the north pasture," Jackson decided, making notes in his ledger. "It's more defensible, easier to keep watch." "And the horses can use the smaller stable for now," Eliza added. "It's cramped but secure." They worked together seamlessly, her organizational skills complementing his practical knowledge of the ranch operations. As the hour grew late, exhaustion began to overtake them both. "You should rest," Jackson said, noting the shadows under her eyes. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "So should you," she replied, covering a yawn with her hand. He nodded but made no move to retire, his eyes still on the figures in the ledger. Understanding his reluctance to stop working while problems remained unsolved, a trait she shared, Eliza rose and moved behind his chair. Tentatively, she placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knotted tension in his muscles. "We'll face it together in the morning," she said softly, her fingers gently working at the tightness beneath his shirt. "Whatever comes." Jackson stilled under her touch, then gradually relaxed, allowing himself to accept the comfort she offered. He reached up to cover one of her hands with his own, holding it against his shoulder. "Eliza," he said, her name carrying questions he couldn't quite voice. She understood nonetheless. With newfound courage, she leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the top of his head. "Come to bed, Jackson. Your bed." Our bed. The invitation hung in the air between them, freighted with meaning beyond the simple words. This was no longer about their arrangement or practical considerations. This was about choosing to truly be husband and wife in every sense. Jackson turned in his chair to face her, his eyes searching hers for certainty. What he saw there must have reassured him, for he stood and took her hand in his. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied with simple honesty. As they walked together toward what had been his bedroom, now to be truly shared, Eliza felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever Holloway might throw at them next, they would face it as one. Not just partners in a practical arrangement, but true companions who had found in each other something neither had expected. Love born of respect, trust, and shared purpose. Dawn broke over the Cutter Ranch with gentle fingers of light stretching across the horizon. Eliza woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar angle of sunlight through the window, the weight of an arm draped across her waist, the steady breathing of someone beside her. Then memory returned, warming her more thoroughly than the morning sun. Jackson, their shared bed, the tender discoveries of the night before. She turned carefully within the circle of his arm to study his sleeping face. In repose, the stern lines that usually marked his features were softened, making him appear younger, unburdened. Without thinking, she reached to brush a lock of hair from his forehead, the simple intimacy of the gesture still new and wondrous. His eyes opened at her touch, clear blue meeting her gaze with immediate awareness. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them comfortable and profound. "Good morning," she finally said, her voice soft in the quiet room. "Good morning," he returned, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek as if memorizing its contours. "No regrets?" The question held vulnerability beneath its simplicity. This proud, self-sufficient man laying bare his deepest concern. "None," she assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Only that we waited so long." Something in his expression shifted, tension she hadn't realized he was carrying melting away. "I didn't dare hope," he admitted quietly. "When I sent for a wife, I expected convenience, partnership, not this," she supplied when he faltered. "Not you," he corrected gently. "Not someone who would fit here so perfectly, who would face down threats and fight fires and stand beside me as if she'd always belonged." The words, more than he typically spoke at once, touched something deep within her. "Perhaps I always did belong here," she suggested. "Perhaps we were finding our way to each other all along." They might have remained there, discovering new ways to express their newfound closeness, had duty not called. The ruined barn needed addressing, animals required tending, and the alliance against Holloway demanded attention. With reluctance tempered by practicality, they rose to face the day, though not before Jackson pulled her into an embrace that promised more evenings like the last. The following weeks brought both progress and setbacks. Word spread among the smaller ranchers about the alliance forming against Holloway. The Wilsons joined immediately, bringing with them evidence of similar intimidation tactics. Two other families cautiously added their support, though some remained too frightened of retaliation to commit openly. Jackson and the men began rebuilding the barn, the structure slowly taking shape again through grueling daily labor. Eliza divided her time between household management and documenting incidents of Holloway's intimidation, creating a detailed record to present to authorities. Through it all, her relationship with Jackson deepened. The careful distance of their early days seemed like a distant memory as they settled into true partnership, their nights as tender as their days were determined. What had begun as practical convenience had blossomed into something neither had dared hope for, a love built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and growing understanding. 6 weeks after the barn burning, their opportunity came. News arrived that the territorial governor would be visiting Red Rock as part of a tour before statehood deliberations. With the alliance now 5 families strong, they prepared their case meticulously. Sworn statements, documented incidents, evidence of corruption in local officials. The night before the governor's arrival, Eliza sat at the kitchen table finalizing their presentation, while Jackson added figures to the damage assessment. "It's well done," he said, reviewing her careful documentation. "Clear, compelling, hard to dismiss." "Let's hope the governor agrees," she replied, unable to completely hide her anxiety. "Everything depends on tomorrow." Jackson reached across the table to take her hand. "Not everything," he corrected softly. "Whatever happens with Holloway, with the ranch, what matters most is already secured." The simple declaration, so heartfelt from a man who measured his words carefully, brought tears to her eyes. She squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, words temporarily beyond her. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast. Jackson was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle even as Eliza moved to the window. "It's Tom," she reported with relief, recognizing the ranch hand's silhouette in the moonlight, and the Matthews and Wilsons with him. They hurried onto the porch as the riders dismounted, their expressions grim but determined. "Holloway knows about tomorrow," Tom announced without preamble. "One of his men got drunk in the saloon, started bragging about how we'd never make it to town to meet the governor. He's planning something," David Matthews added, his normally calm voice tight with tension. "Sarah overheard his men at the general store this afternoon. They're coming tonight, all of them." Jackson's jaw tightened as he took in this news. "Here? To the ranch?" "To stop us reaching Red Rock tomorrow," Wilson confirmed, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Figured we should face them together rather than separately." "The women and children?" Jackson asked, his arm instinctively moving around Eliza's waist. "Safe at the Tanner place," Matthews assured him. "Army patrols camped nearby. Tanners sent their boy to alert them just in case." Jackson nodded his approval of these precautions, then turned to Eliza. "You should go too," he said quietly. "Join the others where it's safer." She met his gaze steadily. "My place is here," she replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Always has been." Something flickered in his eyes, pride, love, and a touch of resignation at her stubbornness. "Then we prepare," he said simply, including her in the defense planning without further protest. The next hours passed in tense preparation. Positions were assigned, weapons checked, the ranch house secured. As midnight approached, they extinguished all lamps, waiting in darkness for the confrontation they knew was coming. Eliza found herself beside Jackson at the front window, rifle ready across her lap as she scanned the moonlit yard for movement. His presence beside her was solid, reassuring despite the danger. "Whatever happens," he said softly, his voice for her ears alone, "know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "They're just the beginning," she replied with quiet certainty. "We have years ahead of us." Before he could respond, Tom's low whistle sounded from his position by the barn, the signal they'd agreed upon. Riders approaching. They came from the east, a dozen men silhouetted against the night sky as they thundered toward the ranch house. Holloway himself led them, his arrogance evident even at a distance. "Cutter!" he shouted as they reined in, clearly surprised to find the house dark and silent. "Come out and face me like a man, or are you hiding behind your schoolteacher wife?" Jackson's hand found Eliza's in the darkness, squeezing once before he rose. "Stay low," he murmured. "Remember the plan." She nodded, her heart racing but her hands steady on her weapon as Jackson stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready, but not yet raised. "This ends tonight, Holloway," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "One way or another." "You're right about that," Holloway sneered, gesturing to his men. "Burns down awful easy, doesn't it? Wonder if the house will go up as quick as the barn did." "I wouldn't," came a new voice from the darkness to their right. David Matthews, emerging with his rifle trained on the riders. Then Wilson appeared from the left, Tom and Caleb from near the remains of the barn, each armed and ready. Holloway's confidence visibly faltered as he realized the trap he'd ridden into. "This is between Cutter and me," he blustered. "The rest of you have no business here." "That's where you're wrong," Eliza said, stepping onto the porch beside Jackson, her own rifle steady in her hands. "You made it everyone's business when you started burning barns and shooting cattle and threatening families." A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to fire the first shot, but neither backing down. The impasse broke with the unexpected sound of more horses approaching. Not Holloway's reinforcements, but a patrol of 6 uniformed soldiers led by a stern-faced lieutenant. "What's happening here?" the officer demanded, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. The next hour unfolded like divine intervention. The lieutenant, it transpired, had been assigned specifically to investigate corruption in the territory ahead of the governor's visit. Holloway's intimidation tactics were precisely what he had been tasked to address. By dawn, Holloway and 3 of his men were in custody, charged with arson, destruction of property, and attempted assault. The remainder of his hired guns, seeing which way the wind blew, quickly offered testimony in exchange for leniency. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the yard, Eliza stood with Jackson on their porch watching as the soldiers departed with their prisoners. The other ranchers had already left, eager to share the news with their families and prepare for their meeting with the governor, a meeting that now seemed more formality than desperate plea. "It's over," Eliza said softly, leaning against Jackson's side as his arms circled her shoulders. "Not over," he corrected, turning to face her fully. "Just beginning." In the distance, their stagecoach still sat where it had been placed after her arrival weeks ago, a reminder of the journey that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. Behind them, the ranch house stood solid and welcoming, no longer just a building but truly home. Jackson's hand came up to cradle her face, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I love you," he said simply, the words new between them though the feeling had been growing for weeks. "Not for convenience, not for practicality, for you, exactly as you are." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling like coming home. My gruff rancher with his practical proposal. His smile, once so rare, now transformed his face as he drew her closer. As they stood together on the porch of their home, the future stretched before them. Not easy, perhaps, but theirs to build together day by day, side by side.